As Belisarius moved through Sicily in 535 and southern Italy in 536, he found welcoming towns and little to no Ostrogothic resistance. In the early fall of 536, he reached Naples, the center of Ostrogothic power in the region, and the only major city standing between his army and Rome. Belisarius hoped to move swiftly past Naples and then occupy the empire's former capital before the Ostrogoths could muster enough men to secure the Eternal City. Taking Naples, though, would not be as easy as he hoped. Belisarius blockaded the city by surrounding it on land and ordering his fleet into the Neapolitan harbor. After a fort in the suburbs quickly surrendered, it looked like Belisarius might be able to pressure the Neapolitans into handing over their city peacefully. Belisarius opened up negotiations, and a man named Stephanus was selected to speak with the general on behalf of the city. Stephanus pleaded with Belisarius to simply bypass Naples and head straight to Rome, reasoning that if Rome fell into Belisarius's hands, Naples would then also submit to him. Stephanus was basically trying to buy some time here. Many Neapolitans didn't have strong opinions on Eastern Roman rule versus Ostrogothic rule, but feared repercussions if they sided with whichever army eventually lost the war. But if they could see how the next stage of the war played out, then they could side with whoever was in the stronger position. It was a good idea, but Belisarius was not having it. He did not want to leave a potentially hostile force at his back while he marched towards Rome. Either Naples would surrender to him, or he would take it. Stephanus returned to the city and suggested to the citizens that they open their gates to Belisarius. But two men, Pastor and Asclepiodatus, disagreed. These men were well known and well respected within Naples. They were also trained as public speakers and very sympathetic to the Ostrogoths. They persuaded their fellow citizens to propose that they would surrender the city in exchange for what Procopius called, quote, such demands as nobody would have supposed that Belisarius would accept, unquote. They then sent Stephanus to deliver these demands to Belisarius. Unfortunately, Procopius does not tell us what these demands were, but I'd really like to know. I bet they were something else. Belisarius, to everyone's surprise, accepted the proposal. Stephanus went back into the city to tell everyone the good news. But Pastor and Asclepiodatus were not going to give up so easily. They gave a stirring address to the crowd, arguing that Belisarius would only be so agreeable if he felt that he could not take the city by force. And if they stood their ground against the Romans, the Ostrogoths would surely reward them for their loyalty once the war was done. The Neapolitans were swayed by these arguments and decided against surrendering. They sent a messenger to Theodahad asking for reinforcements, and prepared to face a siege. The Ostrogothic garrison in the city consisted of only 800 men, whereas Belisarius had landed in Italy with around 7,000 men. He had stationed some men across the south as he moved northwards, but he still had a significant numerical advantage. But numbers aren't everything. Naples was easily defensible due to its strong walls and its position atop a steep hill. Meanwhile, the Roman fleet in the harbor could not sail close enough to the city's walls to launch a seaside attack. Belisarius had cut the aqueduct to limit the city's water supply, but there were plenty of wells within the walls to supply the defenders and the citizens for quite some time. Taking Naples would not be an easy task. In October of 536, the two sides dug in, and the siege began. Belisarius made numerous attempts to breach the walls, all to no avail. His army took heavy losses with each attempt, and he could not make any progress whatsoever. After 20 days, Belisarius was losing patience. With winter fast approaching, he did not want to be bogged down for much longer. If he wanted to reach Rome before winter, he would need to move on and leave Naples behind him. Remember, that is exactly what the Neapolitans wanted him to do in the first place. Bypassing Naples was strategically unsound 3 weeks ago. But now, Belisarius wasn't sure if he had any other choice. And then, just in the nick of time, he ran into some good luck. An Isaurian from Belisarius' ranks had decided to explore the city's aqueduct to study its construction. Belisarius had ordered the aqueduct to be broken, so it was now easy to walk through the channel, since there was no water flowing through it. The Isaurian found that, at one point, the aqueduct fed water into the city through a small channel in a large rock. The channel was very small, not large enough for men to pass through. But the Isaurian thought that it could be enlarged, and if that were to happen, perhaps the Romans could use it as an entrance to the city and catch the defenders by surprise. Belisarius jumped at this opportunity. He sent his men into the aqueduct, and they carved away at the rock until it had been widened enough for men to pass through. With the channel opened up, Belisarius gave the Neapolitans one last chance to surrender their city. They scoffed at his threat. The next night, Belisarius ordered 400 men under the command of Magnus and Ennis to enter the aqueduct. He ordered the rest of his army to prepare for an assault and kept a large force of his most loyal and courageous men by his side. Part of the way through the aqueduct, though, about half of Magnus's men got scared and thought the mission to be impossible. They turned around to head back out. When they arrived at the entrance, Belisarius ripped into them, shaming them for their cowardice. He ordered 200 of the men by his side to enter the aqueduct in their place, and an officer named Photius immediately ran to the front, asking Belisarius for permission to lead these men. Between Belisarius' condemnation and the eagerness of Photius, the men became ashamed and marched back into the aqueduct to complete their mission. With the men back in the channel, Belisarius noticed some Ostrogothic guards in a tower near the point where the men would be exiting the aqueduct. If the soldiers in the channel made too much noise, or if their weapons clanged together while moving through the narrow confines, it might alert these guards to their presence. Belisarius sent Bessus to create a distraction. Bessus spoke Gothic and began shouting to the guards to cover up any noise made by the army. The guards shouted back. This kept them from noticing what was happening behind them. Just as an aside, this always reminded me a little bit of a section from Book 2 of the Aeneid. Laocoon, a Trojan priest, was attempting to convince his countrymen not to bring the Trojan horse into their city. And as Laocoon spoke, he hurled his massive spear with heavy force against the side, against the rounded, jointed belly of the beast. It quivered when it struck the hollow cavern, which groaned and echoed. Had the outcome not been fated by the gods, and had our minds not wandered off, Laocoon would then have made our sword points foul the Argive den, and Troy, you would be standing yet, and you, high fort of Priam, you would still survive. These are two very different situations, but this is what popped into my head the first time I ever read Procopius, so now I'm stuck with this thought forever. And now you are too. Congrats! With the Ostrogoths distracted, the Romans were able to climb out of the channel. They approached the guard tower where Benus and the guards were still exchanging insults and threats. The Romans snuck into the tower and killed the guards without being noticed. Belisarius' men were now free to scale the walls in this section and cut down the Ostrogothic defenders. The men inside the city opened the gates, and the rest of the Roman army stormed in. Carnage was inflicted on the city. The Huns within Belisarius' ranks were particularly fierce. Men, women, and children were robbed, or killed, or enslaved. When Belisarius finally put a stop to the violence, the Neapolitans turned their anger on Pastor and Asclepiodatus. Asclepiodatus was murdered by an angry mob, and his body was torn to pieces. The mob then went to Pastor's house and found that he had already died, possibly from a stroke. The mob dragged his lifeless body from his home and impaled it outside the city. The citizens then begged Belisarius to forgive them for holding out, and he granted the request. He also released any prisoners or slaves his army had taken while rampaging through the city. With the army and the mob quieted, and Naples in his hands, Belisarius set his sights on Rome. Now, at this point, you might be asking yourself about something I said earlier in the video. They sent a messenger to Theodahad asking for reinforcements. Yeah, that. Whatever happened with that? Well, it turns out that the reinforcements were never sent. Theodahad had received the request, but was too indecisive to make even this decision. This made it clear to everyone that Theodahad was the wrong man for the job. With Belisarius now moving towards Rome, the Ostrogothic army had seen enough. They met in Regatta and proclaimed Vitiges, an accomplished general, as their new leader. This was, finally, a man they hoped would fight. When Theodahad heard that there was a new sheriff in town, he hurried out of Rome and tried to escape to Ravenna. Ostrogothic soldiers caught up to Theodahad on the Via Flaminia and killed him. His disappointing reign was over. Vitiges, meanwhile, entered Rome and found it completely unprepared for an attack. Theodahad had not even tried to gather enough forces to defend the city. Vitiges consulted with his advisors and decided that he could not hold the city with the forces available. He left a small garrison in Rome and departed for Ravenna, taking with him many Roman senators as hostages. Once in Ravenna, he would assemble an army and prepare to take Italy back from Belisarius. By early December, Belisarius was nearing Rome. As he approached, Pope Silverius, on behalf of the people of Rome, offered to surrender the city. The Ostrogothic garrison feared they could not withstand an assault and fled. On December 9th, 536, as the last of the Ostrogothic army escaped through the Flaminian Gate on the north side of the city, Belisarius entered Rome through the Asinarian Gate on the south side. For the first time in 60 years, Rome was controlled by the Roman Empire.